Good morning, everyone. I'm Alexander Shu, Assistant Teaching Professor at the Ansari Institute for Global Engagement with Religion. If you're just joining us, we are having a fabulous conversation with Dr. Tyson Yunkaporta, an Aboriginal thought leader. Is that something, the way I could describe? No.
I'm a thinker.
Thinker from down under, who's joined us this weekend for a series of yarns with representatives from different faith traditions, bringing the best of spiritual and intellectual thought together. Yesterday, our first panel began with yarning with indigenous traditions, where Tyson spoke with representatives from Native North America, as well as indigenous Iran. Our second panel, engaging with Asian traditions, featured speakers from Buddhist, Sikh, Hindu, and Chinese philosophies as well. I'm teaching a course this semester called Asian Spiritualities and Global Affairs. So one thing that my students and I discuss are who gets counted as a religion, a world religion in the first place, and who gets counted as an Asian religious tradition. And the Christians and the Muslims in the room will often point out to me, well, these are Asian religions too. So we like to have fun in our classes with categories, moving things around. Asian traditions doesn't always work. Sometimes we try to flip it around and think about, what if we looked at all the world religious traditions as versions of Dharma, as the South Asian traditions do, versions of Tao in the Chinese and Japanese traditions, or Deen, right? Does Christianity have a Deen, a way of life according to the Muslim traditions? This morning, we are beginning with a conversation with Baha'i, Sikh, and secular traditions. I love the eclectic category. Often we think of it as, well, is this something that we did not put a lot of thought into, and so we just have this extra grab bag category that we have to stick at the end. And it forces us scholars to try to figure out some coherence beforehand to say, no, it's not completely random, leftover people, but people that have their own traditions as well. And I thought one way that we could reframe Asian traditions yesterday is to think about them as Pacific traditions, if we include Tyson in the mix. Right, here we have the Pacific Ocean. Here we're talking about peace, pacifying, thinking about the yin side as well as the yang side of various religious traditions. But then I thought Pacific traditions might be a better name for this panel. Right, we have three different religious traditions: secularism, Baha'i, and Sikh, which in the world historical scheme of things can sometimes look like they come at the end of the story, when religious diversity is already a fact on the ground, right? I think if we look at any world religious tradition or religious tradition period, you'll see that there is diversity and pluralism and working together at the beginning, right? We think of them often as the end and the final word, but at the beginning, you can see that the conversation has always been there. The pluralism has always been engaged with, but with these particular traditions on stage this morning, the fact of religious diversity is something that is often a source for self-conscious reflection as peacemakers on the world. And so it's their gift to us, to lend to us their reflections on living in a diverse, religiously diverse world as peacemakers, self-consciously so. Let me introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to hand it over to Robert Stockman to moderate. Over here on the far left is Dr. Jacques Berlinerblau, who is the Rabbi Harold White Professor of Jewish Civilization at the Edmund A. Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Berlinerblau has published on a wide variety of issues ranging from secularism to religion and politics, to Jewish American fiction, to African American and Jewish American relations, to American higher education. He's published 35 scholarly articles and 10 books. I'll just read a few names of those books that relate to what he'll be speaking to us about. How to Be Secular, A Call to Arms for Religious Freedom. Secularism on the Edge. Thumping It, The Use and Abuse of the Bible in Today's Presidential Politics. The Secular Bible, Why Non-Believers Must Take Religion Seriously. and Heresy in the University, the Black Athena Controversy and the Responsibility of American Intellectuals. On the far right is Dr. Robert Stockman, who serves as director of the Wilmette Institute. He's had a passion for researching and teaching about the Baha'i faith for more than half of his life. His fascination with American Baha'i history and with the first American Baha'i, Thornton Chase, led him in 1980 to switch his academic field from planetary science to history of religion in the United States. Dr. Stockman has his doctorate in that field at Harvard in 1990, and he's remained involved in academia, teaching religious studies part-time at DePaul University in Chicago, as well as here in South Bend at Indiana University. And just to the left of Dr. Stockman is Dr. Khushwant Singh, who was born in Punjab, India, and raised in Germany. He studied ethnology, education, and social anthropology, and completed his MA in Heidelberg University with his MRes at Goldsmiths College, University of London, both with distinction. After his studies, he worked as a social worker and took care of migrants and unaccompanied refugee minors. Since 2006, he has been working in the field of international development cooperation on migration, diaspora collaboration, trade barriers, and religion. Singh is the head of Secretariat of the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, or PARD. He is a founding member of the Interfaith Council Frankfurt and has served as its president from 2014 to 2017. He is also the founder of the Council of the Sikh Religion and publishes articles in German and English with a focus on Gurmat Sikhi, spirituality, ethics, behavioral change, sustainability, and the global challenges facing humanity. Dr. Stockman, over to you.
Thank you. Well, there's really very little for me to have to do since the introductions have already been made. I am struck by the fact we had two panels that were all women yesterday, and now we have a panel that's all men, which is a sort of interesting balance. I think today we'll just simply get started with Jacques, and then we'll move on down, and then after the three of us give our presentations, Tyson will have his chance to comment, and among us, we may have other questions, and of course, we'll open it up to the audience. So, Jacques.
All right. Hello, South Bend. Struck me as a funny way to open up. Before attempting an irregular yarn with you, distinguished guests, and the estimable Tyson Yunkaporta, I must first issue a thank you and then share a definition. But even before that, I have to issue an apology. I'm going to do some reading. All my writing is meant to be spoken aloud. And I know we've had some earlier conversations about the written word and the spoken word. Now for the thanks. Gratitude is owed to the Keough Institute and Professors Charles Powell and Mahan Mirza for inviting me, a scholar of political secularism, to Notre Dame University. And this is just so spectacularly well organized. I am in awe, having done this myself at Georgetown. As they say in French, chapeau bas, I lower my hat to you. So the last line was for inviting me, a scholar of political secularism, to Notre Dame University. It's a curious coupling, is it not? You say secularism, I don't reflexively shout back Notre Dame. That is to say, the S word is sort of a hard sell out here, not something you're likely to hear described in reverential cadences or with a boundless sense of optimism. Truth be told, secularism is sort of a hard sell in many places, with the possible exception of, I don't know, France or Senegal or India up until recently, or Turkey at mid-century. All of which brings me to my final crucial task definition. If I am to approach Professor Yunkaporta's exceedingly fun sand talk from a secular perspective, I'd be well advised to make sure we're all on the same page, because this word, for whatever reasons, invites confusion, anger, and the more than occasional unsolicited vinegar-soaked rant. I once described the S word as the most misunderstood ism in the global political lexicon. So when I told colleagues that I was going to Notre Dame to lecture on the intersection between secularisms and Aboriginal worldviews, they all responded as one: "You're going to Notre Dame to do what?" It is a strange mix. Then again, some of my favorite fictionalists have always argued that in modernity or post-modernity, epiphanies are born of incongruity. For better or for worse, we learn when very different ideas and positions are forced to yarn with one another or maybe collide into one another. So what do we have here today, folks? We've got secularism, we've got indigenous epistemologies, we've got God, we've got country, we've got Notre Dame. So let's go. We live in very polarized times, as you know. If I ruffle a few feathers today, I remind us of what Professor Yunkaporta said. Safety is an illusion. The concept of safety, he continues, doesn't even exist in Aboriginal thought. So like the author, I'd rather be interesting than secure. One quick aside about the author himself. Last night, Professor Carolyn Brown was musing on what genre this book is. Tyson himself helpfully proposed hipster pop science. I sense more than a little comedic shtick on Sand's pages. In the world of secular aesthetics, which is another subfield of mine, we place a premium on the dissemination of uncomfortable truths, but making people smile while they're imbibing those truths. So when I say that the professor oscillates between sly humor and dead serious, if not jaw-droppingly grandiose pronouncements on the world as it is, it really is a compliment from a secular tradition. The vibe of the book, to me, is secular. I read it, I was like, oh, I love this. I can totally vibe or kind of interpenetrate with this book, something I couldn't do with, I don't know, things I read in graduate school, like Van Ra, or these kind of dry histories of ancient Israel and various theological texts. Those of you who may be familiar with my work know that I've spent decades trying to properly define the term secularism. It's notoriously multivalent, and it has been so since it was first coined by the British freethinker George Jacob Holyoake in 1851. The philosopher Charles Taylor speaks of the baggage of ambiguity that one lifts when deploying the word. In today's popular journalistic and scholarly discourses, a variety of distinct understandings of secularism seem to proliferate. This is why everyone argues over it. To some it means atheism. To some it means separation of church and state. To some it means a system of this worldly ethics. To some it means the process of secularization, or how religion loses its grip on multiple departments of life, to quote Max Weber. To some it connotes Charles Taylor's own widely discussed notion of secularity, which itself possesses 3 definitions across 850 pages. To many, it is somehow all of these things at once, and they sure don't like it. I mean, aside from atheists, who stands up for secularism? And as far as many atheists are concerned, secularism isn't even secularism, it's atheism. So I feel they really don't understand that which they love. For purposes of brevity, I'm going to share with you my own definition for my own recent book, Secularism, the Basics. I feel some Yunkaportesque prose could be called upon to describe how long it took me to create this definition, how many senior scholars I read over the years to come up with it, maybe parallel to the elders, how many truly catastrophic errors I made along the way, how many brawls I had with other scholars, often in public, and I'm still wondering what Tyson said or did to get beat up by that woman in the duck hunting chapter. Maybe he'll share that. Tonight I will share with you the fruit of that labor and experience. This is my skinny definition of secularism. Political secularism refers to legally binding actions of the secular state that seek to regulate the relationship between itself and religious citizens and between religious citizens themselves. I've noted that secularism comes with an associated attitude towards religion. I would describe it thusly: as long as religion doesn't coerce or kill people or trample on the rights of others or evince a Nietzschean will to power, then it's cool. If it fails to abide by those precepts, then the state, that thing, must step in to establish order, that ever frightful staple of modern constitutions. Yes, for a secularist, if religion stays in its lane, we view it as a repository of wisdom and art and deep emotional insight. Secularists, as I define them, are not anti-religion. We are anti-rule by one religion. We are anti-religious war and anti-religious persecution. We are anti-religion as the driver of public policy. That's because secularism is predicated upon the notion of managing diverse multicultural societies. Post-secular is such an odd and quite frankly dumb term.
Yeah.
Because if fundamentalists on the right and post-colonial theorists on the left had their druthers and secularism died tomorrow, the problem would remain. How are people beholden to different religious approaches and to no religion whatsoever supposed to live together? That's the question that secularism has sought to answer, not very successfully, by the way, for about 350 years, since John Locke in A Letter Concerning Toleration. This is my first entryway into yarning today. But first, I'm about to meta-yarn. Tyson explains what a yarn is, quote, active listening, mutual respect, and building upon what others have said. The end point of a yarn, he explains, is a set of understandings, values, and directions shared by all members of the group in a loose consensus that is inclusive of diverse points of view. In short, he is describing the exact opposite of what happens at an academic conference. Even this act of speechifying and signifying in which I'm engaged in now seems not up to the challenge of Aboriginal discourse, nor its awesome authenticity. With that said, here I go. Talk back to me if you wish. Tweet me into smithereens. Call and respond as you will, but here I go. I want to start by talking a little bit about Africa. With two colleagues at Georgetown, I've been researching secularisms in African constitutions. Amazing stuff. Fun fact, did you know that no less than 27 African nations possess secular constitutions? Here's another fact that I learned along the way. Roughly 125 years ago, only 10% of Africans practiced Christianity or Islam. The majority of the continent's inhabitants were adherents to African traditional religions, or what are called ATRs. But this was before a second or parallel scramble for Africa took place. Imbricated with the scramble undertaken by the European colonizers was a struggle for souls, which is probably the single most enduring mark of the colonialist enterprise in Africa. The result is that now something like 90% of the continent is either Muslim or Christian. The ATRs are down to 10%, and their plight is bemoaned by many. In his landmark essay, Makua Matua cited the perverted role of the state in the marginalization at best or eradication at worst of African religion. For Matua, the suppression of the ATRs occurred at the urging or with the collusion and for the benefit of either both Islam and Christianity. Achieved mostly through missions and institutions of education, the endeavor amounted to a gross violation of African human rights designed to create local servants of colonialism. For Matua, the governing classes of Africa are the products of the colonial state or its uncritical successor, the post-colonial state. The deconstruction of African religion and culture, he charges, was followed by the recreation of Africa in the image of Europe, even in those states which were ruled by Islamic elites. Matua's splendid analysis raises my first question of the day. What was the effect of Anglo-colonialism on Aboriginal religion in Australia? I'm not an expert at all, but after years of studying this, I'm ready to make a few predictions, and maybe Tyson will tell me if I'm correct or not. I'd venture to say that prior to the advent of European colonialism, there was no such thing as Aboriginal religion or religions. Like safety, I'm guessing the word religion is alien to indigenous thought systems. What Westerners call religion is for others enmeshed in a sequence of complex cultural relations, lived reality across time and space, encompassing, well, everything. So where does the secularism come in? Section 116 of the Australian Constitution reads as follows: the Commonwealth shall not make any law for establishing any religion or for imposing any religious observance or for prohibiting the free exercise of any religion, and no religious test shall be required as a qualification for any office or public trust under the Commonwealth. All well and good, but on the basis of 25 years studying global secularisms, I'm going to make my second prediction. I'd bet dollars to donuts that the Australian authorities did not abide by the dictates of their secular constitution. Professor Yunkaporta might enlighten us, but I'll predict that the ruling Anglo regimes expressed a deep dislike and distrust and disrespect towards Aboriginal cultures, made little attempt to understand them, every attempt to exploit them and their resources, and ultimately to control them. They did so in the name of neutrality. Yet as so often happens, the neutrality was false. In other words, the secular Australian government, which claimed to be neutral, secretly or openly favored a particular form of Christian worldview, meant to uplift the so-called natives. Sand talk is like a status report in which a member of a First Peoples surveys the epistemological and ontological havoc wreaked by Second Peoples. Yunkaporta is showing us a complete rupture in knowledge of created by the colonizers, one that imposed a way of thinking through the world that is completely alien to indigenous persons. At the same time, he argues, this new way of conceiving the world is not necessarily very logical, coherent, healthy, or even safe. But what about the secular? A scholar of secularism must caution against reading the consequences of British colonialism in Australia, as a result of secularism. As is well known, the British always believed secularism was good for them, but not for us. The pattern was expertly broken down by Avinahav Chandrachud in his Republic of Religion. The British metropole is not secular. The UK has an established church. Hell, up until a few years ago, it had blasphemy laws on the book. Chandrachud is writing about India. He also mentions Nigeria, Kenya, and Australia, among others. What the UK did is it deployed secular sounding policies and laws on subjects, mind you, not citizens, with very little commitment to actual secular practices. So I guess the question for further yarning is, to what degree is political secularism complicit in British colonialism and the subsequent ravages inflicted upon First Peoples? Starting to wrap up. A secular aesthetic has two dimensions which collide perhaps with Tyson's view. I'm not sure though. I'm curious as to what he thinks. Secular art is first and foremost a mixture. It's about the mix. It is always about very different things coming together all at once, things from very different places. This is why I've always held that jazz is the most secular of all art forms, with its mix of African scales and rhythms, European instrumentation, tempered 12-tone systems, and so forth. So another question I have for Tyson would be the following. Would I be wrong in assuming that the Aboriginal cultures he so lovingly describes are not secular insofar as they are self-contained? I don't want this to be a polemical question at all, so let me be more precise. There is a lot in sand talk about the systems of thought that were in place before European colonialism performed its unconscionable deeds. Those indigenous knowledge systems are shown again and again by Tyson, often convincingly, to be wiser, healthier, saner, complexer, and so forth. Is that precisely because of the lack of European influence? If the answer is yes, then we're kind of speaking about a monoculture, I think. And profound as insightful as monocultures might be, I wouldn't consider them secular. For I repeat, secularism is both cause and effect of tragic mixtures between peoples. My second set of questions centers on his view on cities. Tyson is not a fan. A city, he writes, is a community on the arrow of time, an upward trending arrow demanding perpetual growth. Growth is the engine of the city. Because of this, the local resources are used up quickly and the lands around the city die. With a neat flourish, he concludes that a city must outsource its decay for as long as possible. So here we come to another potential point of tension with the secular. As I understand it, the city is very much like the home field of secularism. Think of the term secular elites. The image you conjure up is of folks living in the tawniest neighborhoods with their advanced degrees and unorthodox by Judeo-Christian standards lifestyles. Cities, not rural areas, are where the aforementioned mixes occur, where completely disparate people come into contact with one another, whether they like it or not. Have you ever been on the B train in Brooklyn? All right, jump on that train, that's where I grew up, and I assure you that by the time you get to Herald Square, 34th Street, Macy's, you will have come within a few feet of the entire human genome. So again, the question I ask, which could seem polemical, and it really, really isn't, I just find it interesting, is how do these mostly rural indigenous knowledge systems engage with difference? And let's imagine that the difference is not some Lord Chesterfield type character from hell, a brooding British colonizer, Let's imagine the differences encountered on the plane of relative equality. Do the cultures that Tyson discussed engage and incorporate that diversity? I think the answer is yes, but I'd like to know more. Before we go charging off and build a Mumbai on Aboriginal land, writes Yunkaporta, in one of those many hysterical aside, point well taken. But in spite of it all, and for purposes of yarning, Mumbai is kind of cool, is it not? I mean, there's tremendous dynamism and creativity there alongside obvious, well-known drawbacks. But yeah, Mumbai, 2 thumbs up for me. Seems like a great city. I have no idea what the answer to these questions might be. Yet I know the answer will be secular in one other sense. The aforementioned Holyoake, who coined the term secularism, spoke of it as being a form of inquiry that demanded sincerity. In fact, his central definition of secularism is sincerity, being sincere when you argue with people, being sincere in your interpersonal relations, and being sincere as you try to configure how we are governed and how we shall live together. What struck me about Sandtalk was the word and thought defying sincerity of its author. How he will maintain that sincerity in the face of all this adulation, I do not know. All right, that's the next emotional hurdle to overcome. The man is who he is, and he's not fronting. The humor too, that also must be a secular modality in this book. I found so much to like and love and sometimes hate in this book. And I thank its author for writing it. And I thank everyone here for listening to me today. Thank you.
I've read that, but it wasn't the same as here.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Jacques. You've given us a lot of questions to ponder later on. And now, Khushwant, if you want to proceed.
Thank you. Jacques, we made a lot of jokes yesterday, and now I'm thinking, is this talk I'm giving to be a secular talk or not? You're the prof, you decide, I talk. And please interrupt me, Tyson, also when I say things where you cannot relate or you relate to it. Please jump in if you allow it.
Sure.
Before I start, we are listening to something. Yeah, that was a very traditional recitation from our Sikh tradition. And the idea behind it is that you can make a connection to the divine intuitively at an emotional level. You don't even, I think, have to understand the text, but you can hopefully feel that there's some divinity going on. And it's very difficult now to make that transition from the sacred to the profane. And I like it very much, Tyson, that I think you are a master in this. I'm just a student, but I'm trying because I have to make a hard cut and come to the next slide. And I'm not calling this sand in the gears, why thinking alone will not save the world. That was the title which came to my mind when I was reading the book. I didn't even read the whole book because it just arrived a couple of days ago, but I read a lot. Because in our tradition, thinking is very problematic. But you will hopefully understand after this conversation why I'm saying this. But then I thought, okay, it's a university and I have to be a bit more serious. So I went back to that title, Wisdom Talks, A Soul of the Soul, Transcending Ephemerality, because this is, I think, what our tradition is not all about, but it's at the center. You see here a picture of our scripture, and it's a very important verse that you can see, and it means that religion only exists when there's spiritual wisdom inside you. And if there's no spiritual wisdom inside you, there's lies and there's sin. And sin is defined as just being out of tune with the divine, being not in harmony, being out of balance. Today, actually a dream has come true. I think, Mahan, you said it. It was a dream come true. You wanted to have Tyson here. And for me, it was always a dream to learn from indigenous wisdom and to be with indigenous people. So I'm super thankful to you, but also to you, Tyson, that I can be with you today. Of course, I also want to talk a bit more about why I'm chased by pigs repeatedly. I also want to talk about what is it to be a Sikh in Germany with a different skin color and all these kind of identity issues. And I really like the way you are handling it, because I think you're also challenged. I'm challenged by Germans saying, hey, you are not a proper German, and I'm challenged by Sikhs who are saying you're not a proper Sikh. So there are a lot of challenges going on, and it helps me to go back to the scripture and go back to these kind of unorthodox ways of understanding who am I. This scripture was actually preserved orally, but then at some point, the enlightened ones who were at the center of this religion decided to write it down to make sure that it's preserved. So they're actually translating it from what we call Bani to Gurbani. Bani is the voice, a divine voice, which we all hear. And then when it is translated into material form, it becomes Gurbani. So actually, I'm now talking in the mode of translation, right? We have a translation from the spiritual world into Gurbani, and now I'm translating that into English, which, by the way, is the language of those who were one of those who colonized us. So it's a challenge for me, to be very honest. And this is not only a script. People often say it's a script language. I call it the language of the enlightened ones, because they redefine words, they create new words. And at the same time, they're so creative, they're very humble about it. They don't say we are gurus, they don't say we are masters, but they call themselves the servant of the servants. And the only guru they accept is the source of divinity. Divinity, perhaps you pronounce it. And there's a thing which I read in your book where you say, I'm speaking from and not for. Is that right, Tyson? Yeah. So we're thinking about our enlightened ones, and they say something else, but perhaps they mean the same what you say, and they call it the concept of bulaya bule. It means they only speak when they are asked by the divine to speak. So it's not like their pleasure. They don't want to share the things they shared, but somehow they were selected as messengers. And that's why they say, don't worship us. Yeah, we are just the finger pointing to the source where you can get the water when you're thirsty. So don't make that mistakes. Gur ke asakar kumabu, gur ki karni kahe tha, which it's called in our tradition. And then I think it's amazing that this scripture, it's a divine unity and plurality. So we are talking of dozens of enlightened ones who have contributed to the scripture, and they come from different supposedly religious backgrounds, different languages, different cultures in North India between the 14th and 17th century. But still, when you read it, it's one message. And there's another beauty that when, for instance, Guru Tegh Bahadur is writing, he's the 9th enlightened one in the lineage of 10 direct enlightened ones. He's using the name of the first enlightened one to show that's not my message. We are just talking about the same thing. So it's timeless wisdom. You will not find rules, regulations in there. And I think the idea was, as you said, Tyson, in your book at some point, that a text becomes outdated. They wanted to make sure that the text doesn't become outdated. It's full of metaphors, and you have to kind of integrate it in the specific situation you're living in. And I'm saying to young people, even when we live on the moon at some day, that wisdom, yeah, it will work, and it has to work. Otherwise, it's not divine wisdom. So there are two things where that wisdom works. It's one, and I think you can relate to it, Tyson, is that healing of the original blemish we have in us. And it's called param. It's the hubris, that narcissism, which happened before we were born. It's a very complicated thing to explain. I cannot go into the details, but the very fact that we have been born is a result of having a hybris in us at a spiritual level. So this text helps us to understand that root cause, but it also helps us to decolonize the mind, I call it, or transcendent the human-made nations, boundaries, like borders, codes of conduct, food and clothes regulations, racism, also. These are all concepts created by humans. So actually that helps to change the level of looking at things. Like Einstein said, you cannot solve a problem at the same level it arose. You have to look at it from a different perspective. And that really helped me to look at it from a different perspective. And you can see, I speak with dedication, but I also speak with love, because it's very unique. Like all other traditions, every one of you belong to a tradition which is unique. And it has its existence and it is meaningful. But like, of course, I have that perception as a Sikh, and I see that the very name of being a Sikh means you're a student. You are here to learn. And Rani, you said it, learning includes unlearning. We say. So it took me 20 years to unlearn before I could kind of empty the glass to put something new inside. Like I'm learning so much today and in the last days. We have a very specific outlook. You see, I'm wearing a star, a turban. Why I'm wearing this? It's not because I want to be different from you. I'm not better than you. Most probably you're much better than me. But it reminds us that there's a higher divine wisdom upon us. And I'm just a very tiny light in this universe, which will go off at some point, at least in terms of the body. So the message is, don't mess up. Yeah, running around with a turban, don't mess up. It's a unique chance you have been given by the source of everything. We have our own martial arts tradition. Are we people who like to fight? No, because we were beaten up all the time. So a martial arts tradition developed. And I'm wearing that gura today, which you see, because in ancient times we were attacked, and the warriors, the Nihangs, were wearing like thick, big guras, so that when a stroke hit the arm, they were protected. We have our own, as you could listen, musical tradition, Shabd Jonki, it's traditionally called. We have our own naming. We have our own sovereign order called the Pure Ones, Khalsa. So I could go on and go on to highlight that we are unique people, but we are also colonized people, where we really need to make an effort to go back to the origins and not to be proud of it, we want to overcome proud, but at least to be thankful for all that what has been given to us. So we are very quality-oriented a religion. It's not the aim to make everyone, I don't know, a spiritual person. And that's why we don't like the concept of having a president or having a committee, and you're talking about it, like no appointed committees can solve our problems, and no institutions can solve our problems. But we are a fan of like me being the priest. We don't have actually paid priests. It's my duty to be like a priest, to be in conversation with the divine. So that picture actually shows, that's the Interfaith Council, how important it is that what you call yearning and to be in contact and discuss. And I said it's challenging, and it's also challenging because, and you're absolutely right, Tyson, you're saying that the West is very good at altering, rebranding, marketing, and also it's also true in our religion. And when I say West, I don't mean like a physical space. West for me is a materially and bodily oriented lifestyle. So like you find it everywhere, basically. So to reflect that, in which ways do we have, where we as people, how do we have been colonized? Just one simple example, yoga, yeah, you can buy yoga mats, you can buy yoga leggings, you can buy yoga swimsuits. Yeah, does that exist 60, 70, 80 years ago? No, but it has been marketed in the West, and now they're making millions out of it. In our tradition, we say spiritual person never earns a single penny in the name of religion. Yeah, that's like a very, you can pass on wisdom, but you don't sell it. And it's very important to understand that like Sikhi is not a technique. It's not an engineering. I can share with you how the smell was of the flower I've seen in the field. But if you want to get a sense of it, you have to smell for yourself. So I can talk about the beauty of Sikhi from my perspective, but I cannot make you a spiritual person. No one can make me a spiritual person. God cannot even make us good people. So the Gurmat way of yearning, Gurmat is like a word for spiritual wisdom. We call it like, or I would translate it as the stories from the indigenous homeland. And that indigenous homeland is the realm of all enlightened souls. So this is the divine source where we all come from. So when the enlightened ones speak of these stories, they say, yeah, Jani Jani Re Raja Ram Ki Kahani. So it's the story of Ram, the story of the divine, and they are sharing that story of the divine. And they are explaining why we have been abandoned from the realm of the enlightened souls. It's not because we were punished, but because we wanted it. Yeah, we wanted it. So all conversations that happen at the spiritual level with yourself, we could call yearning in our tradition. You talk with yourself, with your divine, that Bani, that voice. That's at the spiritual level. But then at the material level, this is what we are doing right now, is the Goshti. Yeah, we're having a discussion. We're learning from each other. So that's happening at the outside. The Sangat is inside when you are in conversation with the divine within you. So we don't have these drawings in the sand, but from what I understand from the scripture, we have the drawings of the soul. So what is actually the soul? How does it work? And you can only explain it by using metaphors, poetics, and as I said, you need an intuitive approach to it. And interestingly, the grammar in the scripture is wrong from a worldly perspective. So if you were to look at it from a normal grammatical view, you would say, hey, these enlightened ones, are they really enlightened? They don't even know how to use right grammar. So they write, for instance, Miramat with Agusatpura, mother becomes male. So it's actually grammatically wrong. But of course, they did it intentionally to show that there's no gender at a spiritual level. So things like that, you have to discover the message behind the letters. Budje budinhar beveki, we say, yeah? You have to discover it. And the letters, they carry the divine, but the divine is not in the letters direct, because these letters will dissolve at some point when the universe will be destroyed. And again, we are very close to you with expansion and transformation. Yeah, nothing is destroyed. Everything comes and goes and changes the shape. And that's why to be afraid of death when we are only changing the clothes? And then there's another interesting thing, and you triggered so much, Tyson, so at some point you have to stop me. This us two thing, we have it in a different way. We have a word for like me, this is the I, referring to the body and the social identity. But then we have a home, which refers to the soul. So when they're referring to the soul, that it has gone through countless of reincarnations, they use the word home. So in that sense, there's a conversation between the man and the home in this sense. I try to explain quickly this original sin. It's complicated, but I think it's worthwhile to share, because usually we don't talk about these things because yeah, it's a bit, it's difficult, as you say. You have to translate and instead and yeah, then make the connections. So like, this is not a physical space I'm showing, but it's just a metaphor for the divine. So as long as we are at the level of the divine, we are governing the universe. We are part of the spirits that are governing the universe. So the guru is plural. Yeah, it's not a monotheistic approach. But we are prone to think, and yet now comes your narcissism, Tyson, and that I'm better than you are, I'm more than you are. When we have that thinking at a spiritual level, the chorus of the enlightened souls, like the ocean, says, oh, okay, you think you're special, no problem. You are released to the ephemeral world, and we are born from this perspective, but from the perspective of the divine, we die. So that's why we are all sick in a certain way. There's a crack, yeah, it's in the opening verse. We are cracked, but we can heal, we can return home. And it reminded me of what you said, the land will move you if you don't move. So like, the land has moved us to this place because we thought we are so great, but now we're realizing I'm not so great. Now we are governed, yeah? We are free, but we are not free. I cannot just fly in this room because I want. You can pray for it millions of times, it will not happen. So that makes us humble. And you're talking about these checks and balances. Yeah, the turban is a checks and balance, and not experiencing that what we really want, that's a checks and balance. It's that humility that is creating. So we call it the Dukkadaru Sukharupya. We all want happiness, but the enlightened one says, happiness is a disease, and being in misery, that's the medicine, because we grow when we are in pain, like anything. So in that sense, we are punished to ourselves. That stone knife model, I really liked it, right? When we heard the chorus of the enlightened one, of the enlightened ones, but at the end we heard ourselves. So that's kind of like overcoming that dualistic approach to life. Okay, that was the I should have shown this before. When we think we are the Superman, and then we are fallen angels. So that picture just shows, like, it's called diaspora, Pardes. We are here in diaspora. So there's no proper home here. In that sense, we could say that we are all second peoples here, not first peoples. The first peoples are there, but the second peoples are here. I know it's a very different approach, but I think we can still connect to what you're saying. So the whole idea of Sikhi is like moving from darkness to light, from diaspora to homeland, from sickness, trauma to healing, to become a researcher of the soul, not a researcher of the material world. This is like science, but this is the science of the soul. And it's about transforming vices into virtues. and vices, interestingly, are called thieves because they take energy. When you think, energy is lost. But when you're in tune with the divine, you become energy through the heart. And that's why when a baby is born, it's not the brain that is produced first, but it's the heart. Last point, I really like this so much. We are all idiots from time to time. Now you know why, like that narcissism is inbuilt into us. We think we are so great. And the mind is like a spring. And the enlightened ones say, like, that spring is the mind, and it just goes off, and we have crazy ideas, and we think we can do this and that. But if you want to keep that craziness to a minimum, so that is the symbol of craziness, you have to put weight on it, and the weight is spiritual wisdom, and you need it every second. So even if you are out of tune for 1 second, they say, you are in hell. So hell is not somewhere there, but when I'm in misery, I'm in hell right now. So they're bringing it to the now, as Eckhart Tolle, of course, would say. There's only the now. There's no future. There's no past. Everything is happening now. It resonates to what you say. There's that big bang, but the small bang is happening all the time. When someone dies, it's a small bang. So the message is, the last thing, don't refurbish the hospital called diaspora. Don't make a luxury out of it. Keep it clean, but make sure you heal and you get home. That's the message. And move, that's why I had this picture. Move from the brain to the heart. That's a key message of spirituality. Try to leave the intellect and let the heart speak. And when the heart speaks, you resonate with other people. It doesn't matter whether they are secular, atheists, Muslims, whatever, it doesn't matter. We resonate at a spiritual level. And this I will not explain, but that is all I understood in my life. That's a model of the soul, and how this is linked to the soul of the ocean of the enlightened ones. But one last thing I wanted to say, and because that's such a nice picture, the idea is a lotus. How do you say this? Quad. To be pure amidst impurity. This is actually what the art is of spirituality, and that's why it's so difficult. And this picture is really the last one, because I took it, but I don't know. It just expresses so much to what I wanted to say today. Thank you.
That will give us a lot of things to talk about later on. And now I'll give my paper about the Baha'i perspective on sand talk. There are many parallels and contrasts between the indigenous thinking described by Tyson in Sand Talk and the teachings of the Baha'i faith. The Baha'i community began in Iran in 1844 and now has 5 to 8 million members around the world, about 177,000 in the United States. It is constantly exploring the meaning of its scriptures through dialogue and consultation, both among the members of its own community and with those outside. Sand Talk thus provides an opportunity to explore some of the central principles of this new religion in dialogue with Aboriginal thought to shed further light on each. I'm particularly struck by a resonance of many of the ideas in Sand Talk with the nature of human beings as espoused by Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, 1817 to 1892, and by his son, Abdul Baha, the faith's subsequent head and authorized interpreter. His dates are 1844 to 1921. The oneness of humanity is often called the watchword of the Baha'i faith and is an important place to start. Know ye not why we created you all from the same dust, Baha'u'llah says, that no one should exalt himself over the other. Ponder at all times in your heart how you were created. Since we have created you from one same substance, it is incumbent on you to be even as one soul, to walk with the same feet, eat with the same mouth, and dwell in the same land, that from your inmost being, by your deeds and actions, the signs of oneness and the essence of detachment may be made manifest. When Abdu'l-Baha, Baha'u'llah's son, came to the United States in 1912, he emphasized the oneness of humanity in almost every talk he gave. He insisted that all Baha'i-sponsored events where he spoke be open to all races, even though, of course, in Jim Crow areas of the country, that was very difficult. He addressed audiences at Howard University and the 4th annual meeting of the NAACP in Chicago. His emphasis on oneness and inclusion particularly impressed the Unitarians, as you might imagine. One commented to another that it was a noble thing that a man from Persia would believe the same thing as us. But the Unitarians did not see the same ethical implications of the oneness of humanity that Abdu'l-Baha saw. For he was quietly and subtly encouraging Louis Gregory, an African-American Baha'i who was a lawyer, and Louisa Matthew, an English Baha'i, to consider marriage. When they married on September 27th, 1912, it was the first interracial marriage in the American Baha'i community, a community that numbered a little over 1,000 people at the time. Abdu'l-Baha praised interracial marriage as the ultimate example of the oneness of humanity. Many Baha'is had had a superficial understanding of the principle of the oneness of humanity and felt that interracial union was premature. But the presence of Louis and Louisa Gregory at their meetings for the next 40 years helped remind them of the great significance and fundamental importance of the principle. Many interracial and intercultural marriages followed in the Baha'i community. The principle of the oneness of humanity carries an obvious correlate of the equality of women and men. This principle is also implied in sand talk, especially in duck hunting as everyone's business. We referred to that chapter, I think, 3 times, 4 times in the last few days. When he was in the United States in 1912, Abdu'l-Baha noted that, quote, the world of humanity is possessed of 2 wings, the male and the female. So long as these 2 wings are not equivalent in strength, the bird cannot fly. He repeatedly advocated the vote for women, a controversial issue at that time, 7 years, of course, before women got the vote in the United States. He insisted that women be elected to the National Baha'i Governing Council for North America when it was first elected in 1909. And our National Spiritual Assembly, the Baha'is of the United States today, has 4 women out of the 9 positions, and I believe the Canadian National Assembly, it's 5 women out of the 9 members. Abdu'l-Baha advocated that boys and girls receive essentially the same education in school, but emphasized that the girls should have, education of the girls was even more important. Indeed, if a family could afford to educate only 1 child, he said the daughter should be favored over the son because she was the primary educator of the next generation. In May 1912, to the Federation of Women's Clubs in Chicago, Abdu'l-Baha said that with education and training, women could do anything men could do. Quote, if a woman had been taught and trained in the military science of slaughter, she would have been equivalent of man even in this accomplishment. Abdu'l-Baha might not have been too surprised to see 2 Aboriginal women settling the score with their fists, as mentioned in Sand Talk, but he would have preferred that no one use violence to settle a dispute at all. To assist Iranian Baha'i women who lived in a far more traditional and limiting environment than the Americans, starting in 1909, he sent 4 American Baha'i women, physicians and nurses, to Tehran to live, to help set up a medical practice with male Baha'i physicians and assist with the opening of a modern school for girls. Apparently, they endured quite a lot of sexist behavior, as you might imagine, in Iran at that time. But as a result of that effort, my wife's grandmother, Bahiye Mesbah Ala'i, who was born in 1914 and died in 2002, was able to attend and graduate from a Baha'i high school in Tehran in 1932. And Mana's stepmother, Rezvan Mohragi, graduated from the University of Tehran and went on to get a PhD in psychology from the University of Utah one of a handful of women born in 1933 of her generation who acquired such a degree. The Universal House of Justice, the supreme governing council of the Baha'i faith worldwide, concludes in one of their important messages about world peace that only when, quote, women are welcomed into full partnership in all fields of human endeavor will the moral and psychological climate be created in which international peace can emerge. A third principle of the Baha'i faith is the oneness of religion. Abdu'l-Baha stated that there are three levels of teachers that God has sent to humanity: manifestations of God, prophets who are followers and promulgators of the teachings of the manifestations, and what he calls local prophets. Abraham, Moses, Zoroaster, Krishna, the Buddha, Jesus Christ, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah are examples of manifestations. Baha'u'llah acknowledges that the names of countless others have been lost in the distant mists of time, and that guidance has been vouchsafed to humanity from the beginning of our species. In response to a question from an Iranian Baha'i, why he asked this, I don't know, Abdu'l-Baha even explained that undoubtedly in the Americas, quote, the call of God must have been raised in ancient times. Thus, Baha'is believe that manifestations and prophets of various sorts came to the native peoples of this and other continents. One implication that God has always guided humanity is that all cultures and religions are based on divine guidance and truth. Baha'u'llah urges Baha'is, quote, to consort with the followers of all religions in the spirit of friendliness and fellowship. This has shaped the Baha'i approach to interfaith dialogue and its relationship with rural and tribal peoples. While no culture or religion is perfect and none are frozen in time and static, all must be appreciated and supported through the Baha'i principle of unity and diversity. None have come from Satan. None consign their adherents to hell, which would be interesting since the Baha'i faith does not believe either in Satan or in hell. Because the Baha'i faith has no clergy and has virtually no ritual in its religious observances, Baha'is are free to continue participating in the traditional religious and cultural customs of their non-Baha'i family members and communities, with a few limitations, such as we don't drink alcohol or take mind-altering substances. Some Baha'is have become traditional experts, such as knowledge keepers or medicine men, and sometimes traditional knowledge keepers have become Baha'is. Lakota Baha'is, of which we have several hundred up in the Dakotas, are sure that the white buffalo calf woman who brought them the pipe and other ceremonies and customs was a manifestation of God, and therefore their traditional customs were divinely ordained. Kevin Locke, a Lakota Baha'i, has helped revive the Lakota flute and is an expert in the Lakota language. I should add that on Friday night he passed away suddenly in Rapid City, much to the shock of many of us. Stephanie Fielding, a New England Baha'i of Mohegan ancestry, has been resurrecting and revitalizing the Mohegan language. Parallel to the Aboriginal activity of yarning is the Baha'i practice known as consultation. Baha'u'llah urges Baha'is to, quote, take ye counsel together in all matters, inasmuch as consultation is the lamp of guidance which leads the way and is the bestower of understanding, unquote. Abdu'l-Baha explains that true consultation does not involve a set of rules, but a set of spiritual attitudes. Quote, the prime requisites for them to take counsel together are purity of motive, radiance of spirit, detachment from all save God, attraction to his divine fragrances, humility and lowliness amongst his loved ones, patience and long suffering and difficulties, and servitude to his exalted threshold. Quote, absolute love and harmony, unquote, is the first condition, he adds. Similarly, yarning is a process with protocols of, quote, active listening, mutual respect, and building on what others have said. It is a dialogue. It may include, quote, periods of comfortable and communicative silence that are reflective and not considered awkward. Consultation is like this as well. Consultation usually includes prayer in order to draw upon divine assistance. Consultation is an extremely important activity in a religion that has no spiritual hierarchy, no priests or clergy. Couples and families use consultation to make day-to-day decisions when they can convince the kids to do so, at least. Groups of Baha'is can use it to make decisions ranging from what restaurant to patronize to how to work on a project together. Though it seems to me if you get 6 Baha'is to get together to choose a restaurant, it still takes half an hour. Baha'i office staff use it to consult together at work because consultation has become a habit in Baha'i rhetorical culture. It shapes informal discussions as well. Consultation, however, is particularly important in the function of Baha'i institutions. And to safeguard those institutions, Baha'is have detailed ethical principles for establishing their consultative bodies. At the local level, Baha'is gather once a year in late April to elect a local spiritual assembly, a 9-member body to coordinate local Baha'i activities and own any common property such as a Baha'i center for meetings. To maximize love and unity, Baha'i elections occur in an atmosphere of prayer where nominations, campaigning, even the mention of any names is forbidden. This unusual set of rules for electing coordinating bodies was noticed by Amanda Ripley, a journalist and best-selling author who recently published a book, High Conflict: Why We Get Trapped and How We Get Out. Her book explores the causes in American society of high conflict. That is, the various processes and forces operating in American society that have ramped up the level of social and political conflict in recent years, such as reducing electoral choices to 2 and, quote, fire starters, people who professionally stoke conflict. She noted that everything about Baha'i elections, quote, is designed to reduce the odds of high conflict. There are no parties in Baha'i elections. No binary categories are allowed. People are not allowed to campaign for a position or even discuss who might be the best person to serve. They can only discuss which qualities are most needed. For Baha'is, the act of voting is sacred. It's a spiritual act of prayerful conscience. One votes for those, quote, who can best combine the necessary qualities of unquestioned loyalty, of selfless devotion, of a well-trained mind, of recognized ability and mature experience, unquote. Those with the highest number of votes are elected. They do not have to have a majority. If a tie occurs between 2 people, one of whom is a minority, it is automatically broken in favor of the minority. Because of this process, people who are not elected to a Baha'i governing body, who have campaigned against each other, have put themselves forward as better, or have put down others as less able or even dangerous. Lying, a central activity in modern election campaigns, becomes impossible because no one can speak about the election at all. No one brings to the assembly a campaign platform that they must advocate, nor are they opposed to the platform of another. Indeed, issues are not even considered at all in Baha'i elections. They are irrelevant because the focus is on electing the people who are most qualified spiritually. The same process is followed in the election of delegates to the National Convention, which in South Bend we had just yesterday. In the election at the National Convention of the 9 members of the National Spiritual Assembly and at the International Convention every 5 years, where all the members, 9 members each of the 180 National Spiritual Assemblies worldwide, elect the 9 members of the Universal House of Justice. Consultation is centered central to Baha'i educational endeavors as well. Typically, when Baha'is gather for a deepening or a study circle, they study a text together. Sometimes someone may be prepared to tutor the subject, but even the tutor, who can be anyone, primarily facilitates the discussion. Study of Baha'i scriptural texts thus tends to be very contextual. People discuss the work in the context of their lives and their efforts to be of service to others. Like yarning, it is a back and forth process for knowledge, production, inquiry, and transmission. Baha'i community efforts to serve others are subject to an iterative process of study, consultation, action, and reflection, processes that can lead to the improvement of the efforts. In conclusion, the subtitle of Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Change the World, resonates particularly well with Baha'is. We're very optimistic that humanity will eventually get beyond the darkness on the immediate horizon and will build a world that is unified, just, and prosperous. This new world will be possible if principles of Sand Talk, such as humble understanding of the role of nature in our world, a respect for all individuals and groups, a recognition of human nobility, a true inclusion of women and minorities, and a consultative culture that shapes human relations, education, and decision-making, come to define world civilization. These are principles found in all religions and cultures to varying degrees, and are slowly advancing with fits and starts across the globe today. Baha'is share with Indigenous Australians a yearning to see such a world come into being. Thank you. We now have a chance to have responses from Tyson. David asked lots of questions. Oh, we've got 15 or so, 20 minutes.
All right, I'll just respond really quick then, and then we can, other people might want to yarn too. Well, yeah, this has been really amazing. There's something about I don't know. There's a male energy thing that it's like and it only works when there's really respect, like true respect, and that respect there's a particular thing that we have as males, that when that's done properly, there is protection. Like you say, there's no word for safety, but there's a protection feeling there that comes with that respect. And I think that's the thing that we're supposed to hold for other people as well. I feel like we're doing that here. Now, I love this, the secularism part was what really, I don't know, that really got me thinking. Because it was strange for me to be invited to something that was about religion, because, you know, there's not many people, and not even us, that would classify our spirit, our spiritual ontology, our practice as Aboriginal people. Nobody describes that as religion. We don't describe it as religion, and you can't quite put your finger on why. Like, what's the heuristic for what classifies something as a religion? And I think, and this doesn't work because then Baha'i wouldn't be a religion either, but I'm going to say it anyway. I feel like a big difference is that there's a separation in a lot of religions of the worldly and then the spiritual. That the worldly is something that's over there. It's something for many people that should be avoided, or entered as you have to, but very carefully. And then then you have this separate community, spiritual community over here. I think a lot of religions are like that. But Indigenous spirituality, it's like everything is spirit, and you're never not in church. Like you're always there. You're always in communion with things. So it's interesting because I'm quite a skeptic, but at the same time my superstitions are part of my ontology. So it's just like, yes, of course there's devils, you know, there's devils, of course. But can you believe all these Americans over here who believe in the actual devil? You know, so, you know, I've got these skeptical ideas about everybody else, but not myself, because of course mine's real and it's my ontology. Anyway, I should wrap up and say what happened with the anyway, Baha'i, similar, I should say. First, like, you know, voting is sacred, for example. There's no like church and state separation. And yeah, atheism is a very different thing from secularism. Right? Yeah, I have to say what happened with that woman now, because everybody's mentioned the duck hunting chapter, and it's the same as at the time while she was dragging my body up and down the street and throwing me against the wall and stuff like that. And things were cracking and breaking off me. People were saying the same thing. Oh my God, what did he do to that poor woman? I swear to God. I swear to God, the first time I saw her was when I turned around because a cash register hit me in the back of the head. This was in the early 90s, so there was some really bad meth going around in Queensland at the time. And yeah, a cash register hit me in the back of the head in a cafe, and I turned around and this massive Torres Strait Islander woman, now just, yeah! And she'd thrown a cash register at me. I don't know why me. She kept saying black bastard, but she was very black and I'm not very black. So I don't understand what that was about. Later, I thought maybe it was like, don't you think you're getting away with pretending to be white in this shop? Anyway, so it might have been that, but she never really said what the problem was. And then she grabbed a steak knife out of this, all the cutlery was on the bench. And then she came charging at me with an ice pick stabbing motion, which usually what you do for that is block it and then go and sort of snap the arm and they drop the knife. I tried to do that, only her arm was like, it was that deep round, you know. So I don't know why I tried to do that, because and so it ended up that the knife went through my hand. And so I had this, and you know, when you've got, I don't know if you know, when you've got something sticking into you and you can see your heartbeat in the object. Oh dear. Yeah, it was one of those moments. And then she's just at me, and it was I had to like really work hard to like not get too terribly hurt. And I thought, I know, I'll just like immobilize her until help arrives. And I've mentioned the arms. I decided a full Nelson was the way to go. And somehow I managed to get that, but that meant I was kind of in her, like that I was enveloped. And, you know, so I'm just there like a tick on her back, and she smashed me against the wall. I had the same haircut then. I've had this haircut forever because I've got a lot of scars on my head, and people get upset when they see me with a normal haircut because there's lots of, I don't know, patches. So I have to have this haircut. I didn't have it for long though, because she ripped most of my hair out. Like she was just reaching back, and she was charging backwards and smashed me against the wall. And I'm like, it was after a while when the crowd is saying various things and they were kind of divided. It was like, how embarrassing, this guy's getting beaten up by a girl. He's not doing very well. So there were those people who thought I was unworthy because I'd let my gender down somehow. And then there were the other people who were like, hey, leave that woman alone. and it was after a while I realized help wasn't coming because nobody was calling anybody or going to help me out. So I just let go. And she kind of, and you know that when Leonardo DiCaprio with the bear in that, The Revenant, it was kind of like that. And I played dead for a while, and then that didn't work. And sort of threw me around. Eventually, she just charged off down the street, and that was that one. I weirdly enjoyed the experience as much as I enjoyed. Is it weird? I like watching that Leonardo DiCaprio scene over and over. I often look at that and think of that time. But I did learn a lot. I'm not sure what it was. I'm still thinking about it. Yeah, there's a lot to learn from a beating like that, you know. But I think it comes down to, you were talking about how do you do the, how now with the narcissism thing, how do you maintain that when there's attention on your work? And that's just easy in our culture. It's just shame. It's a mechanism we have. It's just shame. Like, so I can't use the word doctor like in front of my name because everyone will tease me or say, oh, you think it's somebody kind of thing. But then the same people who say, hey, why you got to be doctor? Why can't you just be one of us? And those same people will be like, uncle, can you write me an affidavit for court and make sure you put doctor?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So sometimes it's useful. So we have that shame thing, but mostly we have women who won't let us sort of find a comfortable spot. Even you can be shame and be comfortable in being shame, but then at the same time, so for example, Megan won't let me sit in shame because she says, well, no, that's insulting to all the people who like your work. That is an act of narcissism because you're saying to them that they're somehow stupid for liking it. And so there's no comfortable place to sit. So I'll finish with that idea. You heard of that idea of insulting the meat? With the in Africa, I think it's the sun, in the Kalahari there. Anyway, then when the hunter, a male hunter comes home with an animal is killed, all the women gather around and just say how rubbish the meat is. It's tough, it's horrible, we can't use this, it's terrible. It'll be really good meat, but it's like, you know, why go and get something else? This is no good. You're the worst hunter we've ever seen. And it's just like a ceremony that's done to make sure that nobody gets ahead of themselves. Anyway, it's a bit like that. And there's a few minutes left. Imagine if anybody want to.
Yeah, let's turn to questions here.
Thank you. It's a really enjoyable panel. If we're talking about these concepts about the sacred and profane and seeing God everywhere, so the question about what is sacred and what is profane makes me also then wonder about secularism and what is secularism. If we're, you know, our religion and secularism, they're two sides of the same coin. It's using the same kind of, I mean, from my perspective, colonized worldview of a particular understanding of what religion is and how we see it as separate from everyday life. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to these notions.
So I've wrestled with that in a recent book. I'm starting to find non-Western taproots of secularism. I'm very concerned about the idea that secularism is this Western technology that is deployed upon peoples to destroy and decimate their culture. So some places we've looked, and I think this room is going to be really receptive to this. Abdullahi An-Naim, who I believe is at Emory now, wrote a very interesting book called Secularism and Islam, or Secularism and the Islamic State, I believe. I would look there. We look to India. So scholars such as Amartya Sen and many others have argued that secularism's views are contrary to what is often thought, not in the West, but in the Mughals, for example. So I agree with you that there is a form of rapacious secularism which operated hand in hand with the colonialist enterprise. But I would just caution against drawing too tight an equation between the two. You mentioned something else about the sacred profane distinction. Remember, in the 1523 on the secular authority, I don't want to get into a whole lecture by Martin Luther. He goes there, right? He argues he follows Paul to the logical ends, right? It says the world is divided, right, between the earthly authority and the spiritual realm. So there are two worlds on earth. So he does Paul, he does Augustine, right? Good. And I definitely see the high tension that creates with so many religions that don't emerge from that particular Protestant space. And I think that is part of the difficulty that secularism has when it tries to go outwards, right? So my defensive posture is to say, but it's not necessarily just Western. We've seen it in India. We've seen it in Lebanon. I was reading a very interesting book by a scholar of Lebanon about the 16th century Druze leader who seemed to be just like John Locke Jr., right? Just the exact same ideas. So I take your question in the best spirit. There's work to be done. But we need to look at the complexity of secularism, which is a field in its infancy. We're starting to understand what it is and where it comes from. And much work to be done.
Tim Eastman, I have a question that you partly answered, but that is, you described secularism to be quite inclusive and neutral with respect to particular commitments, metaphysical or religious. And yet certain types of claims that make metaphysical claims, even quasi-religious claims, such as atheism versus theism, materialism versus a more, say, quantum process field theoretic kind of description or understanding of things, and nominalism, which makes a particular commitment with respect to the, say, particularism versus integrated fields way of framing things. Some of these are taken as being intrinsically somehow secularist, even though when you look at them philosophically, it appears to me that they are in denial of secularism, at least in that inclusive form. And at the same time, some of the religious perspectives that I've been hearing, Baha'i and Sikh and others, have an inclusive aspect that seems to be better than many secularist descriptions. Comment.
So I want the other commentators to jump in. I'll just say very quickly, there are certain religions that vibe with secularism. Baptists just love it, right? In fact, they're the founders of the separation of church and state idea. I think the Baha'i do very, very well with various forms of secularisms. Sufis in Senegal, for reasons that are historically complex, have always endorsed what is called laïcité bien comprise, right? Certain forms of Hinduism, at least at the time of Gandhi, Ambedkar, and Nehru, were very open to. So I'm just going to put it, so I definitely see your question. I think what you're reaching for, and then I'm going to move it this way, is the idea that no government, when it governs, can be neutral. There is no such space without any metaphysical assumptions about anything, right? So I completely agree with that criticism, that governments have skin in the game. I think the key is, and Rawls tried, I don't know if he succeeded, how do you create a government that encompasses everyone's views, as different as they might be, right? And as I often said, secularism is like this contraption when it works. It's this big complex negotiation between all these antagonistic actors, and it holds and it holds and it holds until it doesn't hold. So think of Roe v. Wade, for example, right? Which is this negotiation that nobody liked on either side, right? There was tremendous disagreement, right, from the left and from the right, and juridical circles, right? And now it's collapsed, and now what, right? Now I feel we have a really, really bad and dangerous situation for women in the United States and elsewhere as well. So think of secularism as the best bad option. Okay, hand off to you. The best option.
Yeah,
That's
you
good. Go ahead,
you
please.
can't separate that spirit from ideology. And you know, you can sanitize it, you can hide it, you can occlude it and pretend it's not there and say, oh, we've separated that. But if you're carrying around like so many people, maybe even most people in the world right now, a rapture ideology and you know, a strong belief that the end times are near, the rapture is imminent, and that this will usher in a glorious time that will be great for your in-group and your enemies will be punished and it's going to be awesome, then you know you're not going to say that in your speeches, but you're going to pass legislation that doesn't really care much about solar panels.
That's sure. And Jacques, as you know, the Baptists were in favor of secularization 200 years ago, but perhaps not quite so much now.
No, they've changed. Quick question. Can you yarn with fundamentalists? Is that
That's a good question.
fruitful yarn?
I've changed a bit. We were talking, we haven't finished our yarn about this, but we think there has to be limits to radical inclusion. In yarning, I thought there were no limits when I wrote that book, but I've seen harm done in the meantime. There are people engaging in bad faith who, you know, you give them a hand, I'll take your arm, and I guess you need a strong panel of men to protect you. I'm joking. Yeah. But I don't know what you need for that. We haven't finished that yarn, and that's yeah, that's what these ladies do.
The yarns are never ending,
That's what we'll figure out in the next couple of months.
but this panel is. So,
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mom.
thank you.